said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
I said listen to all of this, sir.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Men's issues? What men's issues?
Men's only issue is toxic masculinity. Feminism is working on that. Stop being so rugged. Stop being such a pussy. Stop approaching everything like a man. Man up and take some responsibility. What's the matter, dude? You mad? You gay? Got mommy issues? Cry me a river. Fucking scum. Feminism is here to help.
One of the biggest cop-outs opponents of the men's rights movement use to pluck a term from feminist jargon, minimalize the issues faced by men and boys in modern society is blame shifting. Profitable industries have been created around proposing solutions to purported discrimination, disadvantage, and other adverse conditions that are supposedly unique to women and girls. It is argued that laws must exist to protect specifically women and girls against such conditions. Services, they argue, must be provided to mitigate the impact of such conditions only when they affect women and girls. Advocacy groups are needed to continue pushing ever-expanding law and policy changes and more initiatives and agencies as new areas of female-experienced adversity are discovered. Funds must be raised to fuel all such activism, including the service initiatives for which women's advocates ask government and public funding for organizations which purportedly act on women's behalf, and only on women's behalf. Men's issues commentators provide evidence of areas of discrimination, disadvantage, and adverse conditions faced by men and boys, and suggest nothing more than gender neutrality in law, policy, and public services availability intended to meet the needs created by these areas of adversity. We strive to raise awareness of information on topics like men's health, parenting choices, bodily autonomy issues, and relationship dynamics. Opponents' response? Demonize, fictionalize, marginalize, and when that doesn't work, rationalize. Feminism's toxic masculinity narrative, a prime example, is a subtle means of not only avoiding addressing the causes behind various men's issues, but placing the blame for them on men. Their tool for that is the use of gender roles and stereotypes as a foil. Male suicide? Oh, it happens because men refuse to talk about their feelings. Never mind that talk is not always how men process their feelings. Never mind that when they do talk, as we went over last week, feminists label them a problem, even a threat to society. Nope, it's all on men, perpetrators of the crime of being too different from women in their handling of depression and pain. What about the lack of protection and assistance for male victims of intimate partner and sexual violence? Oh, that's because men don't ask for help. Never mind that when they do, they're accused of whining, gay-shamed, accused of weakness, and called liars by feminists. Never mind that when they do ask, they're turned down or even directed to perpetrator programs. Never mind that reporting violent crime to police can get a male victim arrested instead of his female perpetrator. Nope, it's men's fault for failing to assume that they'll be the exception to the rule, that Lucy's not going to pull the football away this time. No, this time they'll receive genuine help when they reach out for it, because it's totally rational to assume that. Don't even think about bringing up false accusations. Aside from the main argument that they never happen, you'll hear that they're really the fault of men who don't understand consent. Never mind that feminists are continually changing what consent means and have even argued that it can be revoked after the fact. Nope, it's men's fault for failing to be the perfect mind readers, always able to tell when a woman really means what she says. And besides, women never lie, right? Gender roles and stereotypes. Our naysayers hate 'em. They're the bane of regressive's existence. In fact, the thing the entire feminist movement exists to eradicate. At least that's what they say. And that's why we should trust them to take over our activism, because they're already working on breaking those down. How are they doing that? By imposing roles and stereotypes of their own on men, of course. While they demonize rugged masculinity as toxic, when its manifestation benefits men, or when its existence makes the solution to an issue like mental health or suicide different for men than for women, they don't even hesitate to impose it when women's welfare is under discussion, or when they want to demand that men step up to be women's protectors. They'll blame custody issues on the female caregiver male provider roles and insist that no legal reform is needed because those roles are bad and eliminating them would solve the problem, until the complaint is about disproportionate unsustainable child support obligations imposed on men. Then those roles become our opponents' arguments in favor of maintaining the status quo. Take the varnish off their narrative, and it becomes obvious that so-called toxic masculinity is their bread and butter, and their talking points, or their responses to men's advocates' talking points, depend entirely on which side of the bread that butter is on. Hello, and welcome to HBR Talk 36, Mental Gymnastics, or Gendernastics, versus the MRM. More anti-male shaming tactics. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, and the senpai of sentient sensuality, Anna Cherry, to unravel the tangled web of misandric hypocrisy opponents of the MRM use to try to eliminate and intimidate men's advocates into silence. But before we get on to today's topic, couple of reminders. If you're on YouTube and it starts experiencing platform malfunction syndrome and won't let you listen, we're also on Twitch and Facebook because you can't keep a good badger down. If you want to be sure you'll always be able to catch our live streams, even if YouTube decides to throw us in a gulag for wrongthink, and one of our channels is still in there right now, or if you want to catch our show in its audio format, remember to go to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications, because real Honey Badger fans... Oh wait, you're already here! Speaking of stereotypes, let's take a look at the first of a handful of anti-male tactics exposing feminism has identified that rely on emasculation or gender role enforcement. The charge of cowardice, otherwise known as Code Yellow. And the discussion on that... Exposing Feminism points out that the charge of cowardice involves the target being accused of having an unjustifiable fear of interaction with women. It gives examples: you need to get over your fear, stand up and take a chance like a man, you're afraid of strong women. The last one being the one that I've seen the most: you're just afraid of strong, independent women. Because, you know, strong, independent women need daddy government to to force men to do what they want. But I hear somebody chomping at the bit to speak up.
Who's gonna take the reins? I guess I will. Thanks, Prim.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It really frustrates me to hear strong woman, because it is invariably used in the context of a woman that behaves like what they describe toxic masculinity is. So just in a very domineering, aggressive manner. And to me, that is the antithesis of a strength in general, and especially the antithesis of a strong woman. I find feminine characteristics like compassion, warmth, understanding, magnanimity, humility, fucking submissiveness in the right situations to the right authority. I find those to be strong female characteristics. And that's never what they're talking about. They're just talking about someone who's an asshole.
Well said. And I completely agree. And often, they say that, you need to get over your fear. And this can really go in one of two ways, because on the one hand, I mean, realistically, like, most men aren't going to be afraid of women in like a pure physical sense, because, they don't have to be afraid of that for the most part, because most women, they're just going to be biologically smaller than them. They're biologically weaker. That's just the way biology works. We are a dimorphic species, as much as some like to disagree. So they're not usually going to be afraid in that sense. But then in the other direction, there's the whole Me Too thing, the hashtag Me Too thing, the women being able to get men fired from their jobs or kicked out of university because of a whim. Like they could just say, oh yeah, well, I mean, I might have maybe not said no last night. I might have just been going along with it, but this morning I really do mean no. So, I'm just going to go and report him, and then he's going to have his life destroyed. And then that's going to be the end of it. I think it's perfectly reasonable to be afraid that could possibly happen to you. So, I don't know, maybe I'm just crazy.
No, you're definitely not crazy, but apparently OBS is and didn't want me to unmute there for a minute. I'm like sitting there pushing the button. No, I've seen enough, just from the perspective of watching things happen to friends and family, going to court with falsely accused men, that to say that, this is like the answer to the anger one. They oh, you sound angry. Yeah, well, anger is a legitimate emotion in the face of injustice, and fear is a legitimate emotion in the face of risk. And this is what exposing feminism points out too. It's important to remember that there's a difference between bravery and stupidity, and it is stupid to ignore when there are risks involved in a relationship, and it's stupid to ignore the risk that is presented by men not being allowed to vet women for character, anymore in society, where, like, as far as we hear about, everything from slut shaming being used as a thought-terminating cliche against criticism of women who cheat on their partners. Like, it's one thing to say, yeah, women have to never exercise their sexuality. It's another thing to turn around and say, well, hey, you made a promise and you lied and you put me at risk. That's not just slut shaming. That's holding someone accountable for their behavior.
Can I just say something real quick about that? Just
Yeah.
for 5 seconds. I'm really big as a liberal and a sex worker. I'm huge into not slut shaming and promiscuity being, promiscuity is a loose word, a big umbrella term, but in general, free sexual expression, I'm, a hippie all the way with that.
Right.
However, the reason we call women who are in a derogatory way whores has nothing at all to do with being sexual, because sluts are great. Everybody loves sluts, but whores are disloyal. It is about the betrayal and lack of loyalty. They're emotional whores. So that's really where that pain of expression, why a guy has to use such a strong term, because he experienced pain of betrayal. That's where the problem's at. It has nothing to do with sexuality. It just often presents itself that way because emotional disloyalty and cheating, emotional cheating, often, like so frequently happens with women, but it often goes with actual sexual impropriety as well. But the root of the problem of the whore term, etc., is not about sexuality, it's about betrayal.
Well, I've heard it said you don't pay a whore to sleep with you. You pay her to go away afterwards. But the reality is, without sexual accountability, can you really have sexual liberation? You have to have both, or all you have is sexual promiscuity. And there's a big difference between liberation and promiscuity. And,
well, there's kind of an interesting thing with that too, because on the one hand, they would probably call us all misogynists right now for daring to use the term whores or talk about whores or anything like that. But then at the same token, they will often be like, oh, don't sleep with men, just only sleep with women. Men are the enemy, patriarchy, blah blah blah. Right. I don't have to sleep. Yeah, you're entitled to my body, and they'll make all of these unusual claims, and it's like, okay, which side are you on here? And I know they'll probably just say like, oh yeah, well, there's sex positive feminists and there's sex negative feminists, and it's like, whatever, just. I feel like we should, I feel like we should just stop policing people's behavior, like sexuality. If they want to go ahead and sleep around, and if they're being honest about it, fine. But at least be consistent. Right. Be consistent with your criticisms.
And we can also go the other direction with that and say, no, it's not cowardice for a man to decide what risks he wants to take. There's a lot of things that men have to look at in terms of what's going to happen if I get together with this woman. And it's not just on the false accusation front. I mean, we have the false accusation front pretty covered. We've seen quite a bit, and just as our own group, and there's been more than one of us that's been to court with falsely accused men. And of course, if you add in our having been involved, several of us having been involved with A Voice for Men, and I still am. A Voice for Men has actually gone to bat for several falsely accused men and actually gotten a lot done in terms of individual men who've been through false accusations. But even if you don't look at false accusations, there's other issues as well. There's the issue of the male gender role still being imposed, where the guy is expected to be the provider. So if he gets together with a woman and she turns out to be untrue, she turns out to be disloyal, and she decides she wants to take his stuff with her on the way out, he didn't have a very good defense against that. In general, he has no defense. And then on top of that, you have a culture in which a lot of people, particularly younger people, but it's my generation's just as guilty, have been very careless in terms of they're protecting themselves when they're engaging in hookup culture. They count on hormonal birth control, or they count even as bad as things as the rhythm method. They forget about the fact that only condoms protect against STDs, and they don't protect against all of them. So who you're with is important, and what you do is important, and how you protect yourself is important. It's not cowardice to take those things into consideration. And,
no, not at all.
Everybody loves sluts, but not everybody loves skanks. If you're dealing with somebody, and I will use that term quite happily, if you're dealing with somebody who's a bitch to everyone she knows and is still getting around, it may be because she is screwing around with people who are careless. Maybe she's careless. If you're dealing with somebody who is disloyal, if you're dealing with somebody who hangs around with IV drug users that are careless, you have to pay attention to these things. You can't just say, "Oh yes, free love, woohoo," and not think about what you're doing. You have to own this stuff, or you're literally screwed, and figuratively screwed.
And I mean, sorry, you can go first.
I was just going to say that education is everything that or I speak of is I idealize society, and education's a really, really huge part of it. And I'm, in fact, a proponent of a method of population control, which has to do with not birthing as many babies. And so definitely big on contraception and incentivizing people to, especially in poor situations, not very good, not well off in a variety of ways, mental health or socioeconomic status. I especially would encourage and incentivize monetarily, etc., people like that to maybe even permanently remove their ability to reproduce. But it, of course, sex ed and things like that, there's and drug use. I'm all for legalizing all drugs. Caveat, yes. Mandatory education for every single drug, and you have to pass a test where you describe that, yes, when I take meth, even the first time, 7% of my active brain areas are going to die. Yes, I understand this. You have to pass the test, and same with sexuality. You have to understand, you have to reply to a person what it means to have a baby, and not just, oh, I'll be pregnant, but it's like, I won't have a life for 12 to 18 years. I will literally not be able to go anywhere for the first 3 years. So education.
Well, you have a life. It's just your life changes very dramatically.
Exactly.
It becomes
not the
about
kind of
your
life
children.
Not the kind of life you think, not your life. You can't just go out for the
right.
first year even. Unless you have a huge support system of people who are willing to, watch over your baby. But the life that you will not have any longer. And such little things that we don't even consider when we, as children, as teenagers growing up, we idealize aspects of drugs or of sex or of particular cultures without knowing the flip side. There's a shadow to everything. Everything has a price. Every bonus, every good thing has a price that you have to pay for it. That's just equivalent exchange. That's how nature works. That's how reality goes. So you have to educate people and say that, yes, if you want to have these things, if you want to have freedom, you have to understand the price you're going to pay for it. And you have to understand the risks that you're going to take.
Exactly. And this charge of cowardice, this is a reprehensible thing, in my opinion, because it is used to shut down these types of discussions where you have men are supposed to be responsible. Boys, a little less responsible. Women, about the same as boys, sometimes less. And that's wrong. And we need women to catch up with men. Women need to man up and be responsible. And the charge of cowardice is exactly the opposite. You're not afraid of a strong woman. You're afraid of a woman who is going to be irresponsible and foolish and get you into trouble or worse. And you should be. It's called caution. It's called vetting for character. It's called looking at would I trust this person if we were talking about getting into a business deal together instead of getting into bed together. And would I marry this person? Because if you wouldn't, why are you dating her? You know, these are perfectly reasonable questions to consider. Charge of cowardice is bullshit.
Yeah, I just hate the thought that caution should be derided like this. Like it's the smart thing to do. You don't just jump into water and be like, oh, you know, there might be piranhas in this water, but whatever. I'm just gonna jump in anyway. Or you know, that toxic amoeba that's gonna get in your brain and mess you up. Who cares? I'll just go in there and I'll drink it and I'll spit it out like a fountain while swimming on my back. It's like, no, we've got to stop like pushing that kind of thinking. We have to be cautious in what we're doing. We have to make smart choices. The fact that people are just living for today, the whole YOLO thing, it's really stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, you only live once, but if you act like that's an excuse to do stupid things, you don't live very long.
Yes.
Well, I think a really big part of that has to do with a generation of people who don't have they didn't grow up with fathers. They grew up in a feminist narrative for their future, and we live in an extremely precipice-like times, or at least it's what it seems like, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, where I feel like a lot of the younger generations, or the generations we're talking about past millennials especially, and millennials included, with the rise of the gig economy and lack of any kind of, even social security for older people anymore. So people can't even necessarily live with their parents as much, because things are drying up for their parents too, and having issues with space and not being able to afford to live really anywhere without having a bunch of roommates, as the current state is. I feel like all of those generations are really they are YOLOing in a sense that they don't feel like there's a future, between not having fathers, not living in a world where, basically because of postmodernism and how it has infiltrated all manner of fields and just the collective way of thinking. There's no cause and effect understanding. There's no future as far as they can see between, non-stop wars that America is waging elsewhere and other countries that are at war with each other. And economically, there's no future. So I think they are feeling like this moment is all they really have. And I think it's an epidemic of of humanity right now, that there's this sense, this dread. Nobody can quite put their finger on it. Some people maybe more than others, but there's a feeling of drying up resources. Everything is not improving. And I think that is extremely affecting the collective mind and well-being of humanity in general.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. That's actually, I don't talk about it a lot, but I actually have a nightmare disorder, and that's one of the subjects that's pretty common among my nightmares, is dealing with a situation where basically everything goes to hell in handbasket. And I wouldn't call it an apocalypse. It's more like a civilization apocalypse, but it's still, when I talk to other people who have nightmare issues about it, they have the same kind of nightmares. So I think it's something that is sort of on everybody's collective, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people's minds, and it is kind of in the forefront. And then you have feminists turning around and saying, but anytime you're cautious, anytime you try to hedge your bets personally, well, you're a coward for it. And if they don't do that, they go on to the next one, the charge of hypersensitivity, which we're going to look at right after we go over the first few super chats, because I think if we had at least one of them, what might have been... Nope, these are all before. But we'll get them out of the way before we go on, because I know the last time we had some were related to the various charges we were talking about, and then we got to the end and had to go back and say this was from here and that was from there. So we'll start with the first one is, I believe, from Frenchinator 2, who gave us US $2 and says, would you say they circumcised the truth? And that's a good way to put it. My dad always had a saying about half-truths. A half-truth is being used to misrepresent the truth, is in its entirety a lie. And that's kind of what feminists do. They'll tell part of the truth, and they'll cut off the part that doesn't fit their narrative in order to shape the truth to fit their narrative, and suddenly it's not true anymore. It's just another part of their narrative. Let's see, then we have Tuna Sandwich, gave us US $2 and says, you forgot crisis center suggesting suicide. Oh.
That one bothers me on a very personal level. Just the thought of that person representing a suicide lifeline just makes me want to do very terrible things. It's just awful, absolutely reprehensible. I don't even know what they were possibly thinking.
Yeah, that's a situation that should have led to criminal charges.
Yeah.
Honestly, because that's dangerous. It's one thing to just walk up to somebody on the street and say nasty things to them. You can get over that, or to say it's somebody on Twitter. I've had people tell me to kill myself on Twitter, and I just brush it off. But if I was in crisis and I called a suicide hotline and heard that, it would be like, well, this was my last chance, and obviously I don't deserve another one.
Well, I mean, I have to hope that they wouldn't go as far as to do something like that, obviously, but just knowing that they have somebody, that they're represented by somebody who said multiple times, kill all men, why haven't you killed a man today?
Well, there was an incident where we don't know if it was Clementine Ford. John the Bemused brought that up, but there was an incident of a person on a suicide hotline, at the very least bragging that they had told people to kill themselves.
Oh my God.
So there was, and I don't have the news story offhand, but that happened. But yeah, Clementine Ford, speaking of, it was Jordan Peterson that said you can do anything you want, but not without consequences. And she has free speech, and she can say anything she wants. But if she's going to be an anti-suicide advocate, and people are going to rely on her to advocate for the value of human life and to convince people not to commit suicide when they are at their worst, when they are having their greatest crisis of existence, she can't have a history of hating one sex so much that she advocates that people say kill all men and have you killed a man today, and treats them like they're worthless the rest of the time. It's very different from somebody who, say, pumps gas at your local gas station posting to hashtag kill all men. That's just an idiot. It's not somebody who's responsible for anybody else's welfare at a time when their self-image or their trust in themselves or their ability to consider going on another day is in question. It's not somebody that's responsible for pulling them out of that dark place, and you can't have somebody that's responsible for that turning around and saying, well, except these people have no value and it's okay if they die. So yeah, but going on, we have Frenchinator 2 gave us US $5 and says, I don't have the Discord code on my email. What should I do to get it? I'm on Patreon with the seed level. Okay, that one we have to find out from Allison, because she's the one that's going to have that information. And then Frenchinator 2 also gave us US $5 and says, my mom was concerned with an anti-feminist post I made on Facebook, and she told me that is not what feminism is. It's about the empowerment and equality. Well,
of course it is.
because telling women they better shop around before they pick out a guy, but telling men they're a coward if they vet women for character, that's totally about equality. Let's see. We will scroll up here, and I will read off the charge of hypersensitivity. This is another one. Here we have feminists. They sit around and tell men that they're not exhibiting their feelings properly. They're not identifying their feelings, and they're not communicating their feelings. And then they do, and we get, well, you're a crybaby. The target is accused of being hysterical or exaggerating the problems of men, i.e., he is accused of playing Chicken Little. Examples: stop whining, get over it, suck it up like a man. You guys don't have it nearly as bad as us women. You're just afraid of losing your male privileges, your fragile male ego. Hashtag masculinity so fragile. Oh, you guys need to get a grip. And Exposing Feminism points out, one who uses the code blue shaming tactic reveals a callous indifference to the humanity of men. This isn't about men being too sensitive. It's about women being too insensitive, and feminists being too insensitive. And this one gets used on men's rights activists by traditionalists. And it's not. This is not to disparage traditionalism. If it's your bag of chips, it's your bag of chips. You have every right to live how you want to live. Nobody's saying you can't. And frankly, I think if a woman is fortunate enough to be with a guy who has the similar mindset to hers, if they're both traditionalist, she damn well better appreciate him. But as far as other men go, if you're a traditionalist woman or a traditionalist man, it's not really your prerogative to decide that for everybody else. And this hypersensitivity charge, I hear this from traditionalists as often or more often than I hear it from feminists. It's not really a solution to men's issues. It's more of an attack on men who have a different lifestyle than you do.
I frequently found that traditionalists are deeply gynocentric.
Yeah, and there is that is one factor that is kind of a divider in the men's rights movement between traditionalist MRAs and non-traditionalist MRAs, and between conservatives and liberals in the movement as well, because a lot of conservatives are traditionalist. Not all of them, but a lot. And like I said, there's really nothing wrong with choosing how you're going to live and living that way, with having a moral fabric. This is my matrix of morals and ethics, as long as you live up to it. And it's just not everybody's game, and it's not necessarily fair to try to impose it on everybody else. And a guy is not a crybaby if he doesn't want to be a dad, or if he doesn't want to pay child support because his ex-wife cheated on him and ran off with another guy. He actually has a legitimate beef there.
Or heck, even if he just wants to express a grievance about something, like if he's sad about how his day went, he should be able to express that he's sad about how his day went without somebody being like, oh, you just need to suck it up and get over it. That's what being a man is like. Like I've seen people say, oh yeah, men should be totally free to express their feelings. We kind of went over this last time. They should be free to express their feelings as long as it's in the way that I like them to express their feelings. And my ideal man is a strong, stoic person, despite my claims. So if I see a man who's crying or down on his luck, I'm going to go and make fun of him. It's just a really terrible thing. Like there was a really awful example that I saw. It might have been on the men's rights subreddit recently, where there was a woman saying that men should be free to express their emotions, and then right side by side there was another tweet of her saying, oh, if I see a man who is crying, I have to force myself to think of really sad thoughts to avoid laughing at him. And it's just like, what is wrong with you? Why would you behave like that? Like, who gets their jollies out of behaving like that? That just seems sick to me.
It's the most annoying thing. Feminists, the level of hypocrisy in terms of what they say they want from men and what they demonstrate they want from men. They can't be honest about their preferences, and they can't be honest about what they think makes a man an adult. And the reality is, there's a degree of stoicism that is appropriate because you're an adult, and that degree of stoicism is appropriate for both sexes. Sometimes you don't get what you want in life, and sometimes you engage in a behavior, and that behavior has consequences, and those consequences include a responsibility that you have just picked up. That's not a gendered thing, that's a genderless thing. Women have more opportunity to get out of it than men. But both sexes should adult up in that situation as much as they possibly can, and make every effort to live up to their adult responsibilities. That doesn't preclude complaining about it, and it certainly doesn't preclude the right to say, hey, this issue, this injustice is happening, and it deserves a remedy. The people it's happening to deserve reform. And this charge of hypersensitivity is a thought-terminating cliche again, that is designed to avoid the discussion when it comes to reform that's needed in men's cases. That we need legal reform in terms of intimate partner and sexual violence laws, especially like the United States has it set up at this point so that, once again, like I said in the opening, a guy can be a victim of intimate partner or sexual violence, call the police, report the crime, and get arrested for being the perpetrator instead of dealing with the actual perpetrator, especially if the perpetrator's a woman. And that needs to be remedied. And you're not a crybaby for talking about that. The one that I see it used the most on, though, is intactivists. And I know that not everybody in the men's rights movement is an intactivist, but intactivist MRAs really get shit on. They really get told that they're whining about something minor, and they really get told that guys don't have it as bad as gals in terms of what's removed or what damage is done in the act of underage genital cutting. And to be frank, it doesn't matter if it's the same or not. It doesn't matter if other people don't think it's important. It's still a violation of one's bodily autonomy, and it's not whining to point out that it is wrong for the law to support violations of bodily autonomy, and that's an area of needed legal reform. Let's see. I'm gonna scroll down a little bit here because this one's actually a bit longer. One of the pieces of advice that Exposing Feminism gives is it may be constructive to confront such an accuser and ask if a certain problem men face needs to be addressed or not, yes or no, however small it may seem to be. If the accuser answers in the negative, it may be constructive to ask why any man should care about the accuser's welfare, since the favor will obviously not be returned. And this is something that a lot of people that oppose the men's rights movement are very self-serving. And the minute you point that out, why should I care about your problems? Why should I fight for reform for your issues if you're going to ignore men's issues? It's a good way to kind of get their attention. If the accuser claims to be unable to do anything about said problem, one can ask the accuser why an attack is necessary against those who are doing something about it. And that's another one. A lot of times they'll say the men's rights movement doesn't do anything. And then they'll turn around and attack the men's rights movement for raising awareness of mental health issues, men's health initiatives, areas of discrimination, areas where legal reform is needed, and then turn around and they're not doing anything. You ask them what they're doing about it, and it's nothing. So, I don't know, do either of you guys have anything to add, or should I go on to the next set of super chats?
No, I think I've said my piece on this one.
And I think I've missed... Oh, there it is. Okay. Like, I know there's more super chats. There's a lot of scrolling to do here. Okay. Frenchinator2 gave us US $5 and says, if Hoff Summers can make a women's empowerment movement that takes over feminism, then I wish her well. Well, that would be nice.
A couple.
Did I miss... Okay, I haven't scrolled far enough back then. Oh, I see. There we go. Master Rogue gave us US $2 and says, even my aerokinesis has a price. Okay, moving the air is now expensive. Frenchinator gave us US $2 and said, feminism is not a monolith. Monolith? That's not... My tongue is dyslexic now, guys. That's not real feminism. And
must be the allergies.
There we go. Yes, I am allergic to feminism. I break out in cuss words. Frank Tomeo gave us Canadian $5 and said, a surgeon defended the system for screwing me over, then tells me to trust the system. Where does this fit in? A surgeon. That's a weird one.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know more about that. It doesn't really fit in. You would think a surgeon would be smarter than that, but I don't know. Maybe he wasn't a brain surgeon.
Oh,
well,
dear.
when you uphold the system and are paid by the system, and you get vacations and lunches and all sorts of conferences at exotic locations from the pharmacy companies and the system,
yeah, there is
then you're
that.
going to defend the system.
There is that. And the system has really been good to some practitioners of medicine, as long as they cooperate. It's been really bad to others. I mean, you have the pain care field has been really, really hit hard by the DEA. But that's a story for another show. And I've talked about that before. To say that I'm pissed off about it is a dramatic understatement. But in any case, we will go on with the next one. We got our sex for the day. Cyberzerk gave us 50 sex and says, I don't go around defining what a woman is and what not, so I won't let a woman define for me what a man is. I think that's reasonable. And I look to my dad for stuff like that. And honestly, my dad never used, when my brother and I were growing up, never used the phrase real men. He talked about mature men. He talked about strong men. He talked about wise men. But he never said real men. And I think the reason is there's no such thing as a fake man. Once you're an adult, you're a man, and there are men who exhibit admirable characteristics. And there are men whose characteristics make their lives better and their lives easier, and the lives without making the lives of the people around them harder. And then you have men and women. This is true of both men and women. Both sides of this is true of both men and women. You have men and women who are unwise and whose characteristics, whose character traits and behaviors end up making their lives and the lives of the people around them harder, and they're not as happy because of it. And that's what you look at. I don't like the term real men because of that. I like talking about strong men and strong women in terms of good character that allows you to be a functional part of your society and contribute to your society and have a happy life without having to step on other people. But I guess you could just describe that as adulthood. And then we have Frank Tomeo gave us $2 Canadian and says, sometimes you don't want to be frank, Hannah. I will be frank if I want to be frank. I can cosplay, damn it.
Just don't call me Shirley.
Okay, but does that mean you're serious? Frenchinator 2 gave us US $5 and said, I see it as good behavior or bad behavior, not real men or real women. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say. I don't like the real or fake, or they don't really say fake if it's not real. It's just there's real men and real women and not real. So yeah. That's the other one. Real women apparently are, according to feminists, women of bad character traits. So that tells you a lot about them.
I thought it was real women have meat on their bones or whatever these days.
Yeah. I like the picture of the rhino that's going around, and underneath it says, real unicorns have curves. Hokibukisa gave us US $4.99 and said a man should not feel shameful from these hateful man-tears women. He should feel contempt and resentment. And as much as it suits your ability to deal with it, yeah. Don't let somebody make you feel anything. You choose what you're gonna carry. And you let them carry their own shame if they're wrong, and leave it at that. The next one is the charge of puerility, the Peter Pan charge, code green. The idea that you're just not an adult because you care about men's issues. The target is accused of being immature and or irresponsible in some manner that reflects badly on his status as an adult male. And, examples, grow up. You are so immature. Do you live with your mother? All you neckbeards out there that live in your mommy's basements. I'm not interested in boys. I'm interested in, catchphrase, real men. Men are shirking their God-given responsibility to marry and bear children.
It's men that are shirking that, is it? Okay,
yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah, considering that the Department of Agriculture, I don't know why it's coming out of the Department of Agriculture, but the Department of Agriculture in the U.S. is apparently freaking out over the reduction in female fertility, particularly in minority women in the United States. The entire article, and this was a pretty long article. I read the entire article. I didn't see the word abortion in it once. So they can't figure out why women aren't having as many babies, and they're not considering abortion as a potential contributor to that at all. Because, that would be politically incorrect. We can't acknowledge that. But yeah, no, men are immature and men don't want to take responsibility, right? And Exposing Feminism points out, it should be remembered that one's sexual history, marital status, parental status, etc. are not reliable indicators of maturity and accountability. If they were, then we would not hear of white-collar crime, divorce, teen sex, unplanned pregnancy, extramarital affairs, etc. And this is true. A lot of people grow up in circumstances that would normally, you would expect those circumstances to lead to them having a certain result when they grow up, that it would shape them in certain ways, and they turn out to be exceptions to that supposed rule. People grow up in very rough circumstances and then turn out to be heroes, or just simply average Joes, but average Joes of excellent character. And then you have people who grow up in excellent circumstances with parents that everybody thinks of as great teachers or great mentors, and yet they turn out to be absolute dipshits that ruin their own lives and the lives of everyone around them. So it's their circumstances, the things that they've learned from people who have engaged in really stupid behavior in their 20s and then turn out to be better people because they learned some very hard lessons because of it. Live in poverty for 10 years and then realize that they just got to get their crap together and get a job. You cannot look at somebody's history and make it the only thing by which you judge them. And the other thing that I would advise is, just because somebody has a concern over a particular responsibility that they don't want doesn't necessarily mean they're irresponsible. Not everybody wants to be a parent. Not everybody's cut out to be a parent. And recognizing or presuming oneself to not be cut out to be a parent and taking measures to ensure that one doesn't end up in that situation because of one's decision. Hey, I'm not cut out to be a parent. I'm not going to put a kid in that situation. That's not immature. It's not shirking your responsibility. It's making a responsible decision based on self-assessment.
Yeah, man, what this reminds me of something that really, really pisses me off. I saw several articles about it where like women tricked their boyfriends or husbands into becoming fathers when they said they didn't want to do that. And they said, oh, it's the best decision I've ever made because it's forced him to really change, and he's really grown up ever since the baby came into the picture. And it's like, okay, good for you for taking away that person's freedom to determine their own life. Like, you must feel so proud of yourself.
Yeah, you know, if he took responsibility, kudos for him. The thing is, all that demonstrates is that he was mature already. You know, that spark of maturity was already there, or, you know, he would not have made a mature decision.
Well, it's also like, Idiocracy, which we watched for the first time about 15 years ago. Well, no, less than that, about, 11 years ago. And it was very creepy back then, but now it's like a lot of it has come true. So if you have not seen Idiocracy, I highly recommend it. I mean, we have President Camacho.
Agreed.
Currently, but anyway, the point of that is something that I just lost. Fuck. Oh yeah. The smart thing to do is in the beginning, opening credits of Idiocracy. The smart thing is to not have kids until you got your house, until you got your 401k, until you have your career situated. Frankly, we live long enough now, and we have such good medical care that there's absolutely no fucking reason for women to have birth before the age of 30. There's just no fucking reason, or even 35. Like, honestly, there's no reason not to wait until you're situated and you made all the right financial decisions and you can support your baby and you have grown mentally and emotionally as a woman to be a mother in the first place, and that you have been with your partner for a long time to where you've established a bond and that you're going to be together and you're going to raise this child together. Kids should be wanted. That makes the best people in the end. Yes, there are definitely people who've overcome adversity, who have grown up insanely abused and tortured, and they became geniuses because of it. Yes, that does happen, but it breaks a whole hell of a lot more people than it forges into diamonds. And the smart thing is to wait to have kids. That is the responsible thing, to not want to have kids sometimes altogether. Given your temperament, it's kind of like when you get a pet and you know that you're going to be traveling a lot, that you live in an apartment, you just can't get a dog. It's just not smart. So similar mentality, for kids.
Yeah. I mean, like, there are certain biological reasons to, like, not put it off too long, but I mean, like, the risks are usually quite low until after 35.
Well, there's a couple of things. The risks have reduced. Modern medical care, and particularly modern prenatal care, have significantly reduced the risks of various birth defects. But,
yeah, that's awesome.
So that's been really great. And the other thing is, because you'd be situated, you would have better access to that medical care, and that would make a big difference. And some of the worst birth defects happen because the immaturity of the pregnant mother. Not only does she not have access to that prenatal care, she also doesn't recognize the value and importance of it. And she doesn't do everything the doctor says. And some of it's due to alcohol consumption, and some of it's due to failure to eat right. So there's a lot of things that go into that. So I mean, yeah, I would say, I wouldn't put it off too far past 30, but and definitely not past 40 before you have your first child, if you're going to become a parent. But I don't think you necessarily, like, I was 27 years old when I had my son, and if I had a lot of the gals I went to high school with, there were some of them that had their first child still in high school. Some of them got married right out of high school. Some of them, most of them that became parents in their early 20s. And if I had become a parent in my early 20s, I would have been a far less good parent. I don't think I had the discipline back then that I did by the time I was 27, and it was partly because, as I was telling the gals before the show, I went to this school of self-inflicted hard knocks, gave myself some hard lessons to learn from, put myself in stupid situations, and then had to work my way out, because I wasn't going to admit to my parents how badly I'd screwed up and go home to mommy. So I learned things by the time I was 27 that made a big difference in what kind of mom I turned out to be. So yeah, there's biological reasons to not to be cautious about waiting too long. But at the same time, if you have the sense that you don't have the maturity, don't get pregnant on purpose. Don't get somebody pregnant on purpose. It's better to get yourself ready first. And it's not childish to recognize that. In fact, it's mature to recognize that. Let's see what else was addressed in this. Like one of the big complaints that I see from feminists, and also from traditionalists in terms of childishness, it's not just whether or not you have kids. It's whether or not you take responsibility as a man because a woman got pregnant. And with our modern society, in which a woman has like 11 different categories of birth control available to her, including, if she really doesn't want to be a mom, physical measures. And then she has the ability to abort, which, it doesn't matter whether you're pro-abortion or anti-abortion, pro-life, pro-choice, whatever you want to call it, the option is there, which means she doesn't have to carry to term if she doesn't want to. And then on top of that, if she doesn't want to support a child, or she didn't prepare herself and she can't support a child, she doesn't have to retain custody. She can put the child up for adoption. She can use safe haven abandonment. She can give the child custody of the child to the father. She can give custody of the child to her parents or other family members that want to raise the child. So when a woman becomes a custodial single mom, a mom with custody of her child and lack of a marriage, that is a lifestyle choice. It's not something that fell out of the sky and landed on her head. The knock-up fairy didn't put a curse on her. The child that she has in her home was entirely her choice. The whole circumstance was entirely her choice. It isn't immature to recognize that she got herself into that situation almost entirely, that the decision to retain custody was hers entirely, that this was her choice, and this is her lifestyle, and she should be responsible for it. It is not immature to not change your mind about whether you want to be part of that because she forced it, because she decided she wasn't going to use her birth control, or she wasn't going to abort, or she wasn't going to give up custody. And it's not immature to decide that means that you don't want to spend money on her. And I hate to be harsh, but if more women were faced with a situation wherein they could not use daddy government to force men to support that choice financially, maybe fewer women would make that choice in the first place. Maybe women would become a little more risk averse. Maybe they might grow up a little bit. I don't know. Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
No, I think that was really well said.
Well, in that case, I will go on to, let's see, we stopped with good behavior and bad behavior. Hoki Bukisa gave us $4.99, said, oh no, we did that one as well.
Yeah.
Okay, Frenchinator 2 gave us, used $5 and said, Gloria Steinem's history shows that she's projecting it all on men. I can understand why she feels that way. Somehow her mother was not bad by her. Okay, I'm not sure what the last sentence means, but I don't know. Gloria Steinem got married. That's That's the extent of what I know. The woman who needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, apparently decided that she liked bicycles after all. French Honey Badger gave us US $5 and said the government makes having kids too expensive and makes it more advantageous to prey on other people's money and kids. That's why idiocracy is rising.
Yeah, a lot of people I know are either not having kids because they're not interested, or not having kids because they find it too expensive, or they don't think that they'll be able to afford to care for them. I definitely see kind of even amounts of the same sort of thinking.
Yeah, I will say one of the things that the government is doing, the government makes having kids too inexpensive if you're a married couple, but it pays single mothers to make that bad decision. It pays women to live that lifestyle choice of having multiple baby daddies. It'll pay. Uncle Sam will pay your housing bill. Uncle Sam will pay your electric bill. Uncle Sam will cover your medical expenses. Uncle Sam will give you a cash stipend. Uncle Sam will give you a free phone. Uncle Sam will pay to repair your car, or even buy you a cheap-ass car. Uncle Sam gives you all kinds of shit if you choose to become a single custodial mom. And Uncle Sam will go after the baby daddies for part of the money back. Not enough to cover the cost, but enough to make them homeless. And then all Uncle Sam will ask you to do is volunteer for a few hours a month. Enough, if you put them all together, it would be about the amount somebody works in a week to be considered full-time. And that's all you got to do to get all those things. So it kind of makes you wonder what Uncle Sam's getting out of the deal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Let's see. Hokey Bukisa gives us $1.99, says if you can't afford your kids, you should lose them. And Frank Tomeo gives us $2 Canadian, says Justin Trudeau does it too, Hannah. And I'll bet you the UK has a similar situation. French Honey Badger gives us US $5 and says Uncle Sam will print money to pay for all of this and the rest of his shitty program, making sure your money becomes worthless. And Uncle Sam's been doing that for a very long time. But it's the guys who don't want to put up with all of that who are immature. So going on, we have the charge of invirility, Code Lavender. And of course that's a caveat to the Lavender movement. The target's sexual orientation or masculinity is called into question. Examples: are you gay? I love when MRAs who are gay get to answer, yeah, why yes I am, thanks for asking. I need a real man, not a sissy. You're such a wimp. Unless one is working for religious conservatives, it is usually of little consequence if a straight man leaves his accusers guessing about his sexual orientation. That's the answer that Exposing Feminism has, and that's a good one. Like, let him call you gay. What if you're not? Does it matter? It's not like it's an insult anymore.
Yeah, I thought we were supposed to be like pro LGBT relationships. Why are you still using that as an insult against men now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Why are you a homophobe? That's my question back at them. Are you asking if I'm gay? Is it because you think being gay is something bad? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, exactly. Thought we were past that.
Let's see. For was that Harthoon Paladin? The Lavender movement was the gay rights movement back in the early part of the 20th century. Before it became known as gay and lesbian rights, gay men really, and we went over this in a previous show, but gay men were really the movers and shakers in terms of gay rights for about 100 years before anybody stepped up and represented lesbianism and represented any other aspects of the alphabet soup movement as it is today. Gay men took all the hard knocks first, and then everybody else came along when things started to get easier. But yeah, this, like, calling somebody's sexual orientation or masculinity into question. Who cares? Who cares if they ask if you're gay? Who cares if they turn around and say you're a wimp? You know, the answer to that I would give is, I thought you wanted men to express their feelings. Is this an exception?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
also, if you do care too much, then perhaps there are some homophobic, latent thoughts that you need to confront and send them on their way.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about.
I mean, God knows men are shamed in
Yeah.
every shape and form, and that's one of the first insults still. That and, real man, what does all that imply? A real man wouldn't suck dick, right? Just little insidious things like that.
That's gross. Like, I don't know why people would say something like that. Like, I have friends that I really love that are gay, and to have anybody try to claim that they are not a real man because they're gay, it's like, go eat a dick.
How some of the toughest guys I've hung out with do.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's not a bad thing. Go do it, and then maybe you'll stop insulting gay men.
Yeah, but in any case, yeah, this idea that and the uses they have for it, usually this one gets thrown at victims of sexual assault. Just because you didn't want that woman doesn't mean you're gay. Just because you said no because you're married doesn't mean you're less of a man. Just because you didn't want sex right now doesn't mean you don't have a sex drive. Just because you didn't want sex under that circumstance doesn't mean that you can't perform. All of these things are shaming tactics that would never be accepted against a female victim. She says no, that's no. It doesn't matter why she says no. It doesn't matter how she says no. It doesn't matter when she says no. We are supposed to accept that simply means stop. Now, without hesitation, don't even finish that thrust. But a guy who says no to a hot chick, suddenly there's something wrong with him because she's hot and he should want her. A guy who says no because right now he's exhausted. What's wrong with him? Doesn't he have a sex drive? A guy who says no because he doesn't trust the woman. Well, he's just afraid of girls. He's afraid of women. What's wrong with that guy? No. You're allowed to say no. Nobody should have to give you permission to say no. And the only other thing I gotta say is, when I see this used against men going their own way, I have to laugh. Because part of going your own way is not giving a fuck. So good luck shaming them by calling them gay.
Yeah, no kidding. Not to mention, if they tried to do that sort of thing against any woman, like say, oh, like what's the matter with you? Like, oh, are you a lesbian? Why don't you want to have sex with this guy or whatever? They'd be like, oh, you're so entitled. You're entitled to women's bodies. All men are rapists. Blah blah blah. And it's like, okay, well then stop saying stupid things against men. Like, men are allowed to have their sexual freedoms, their own sexual choices as well. So stop being a jerk about it.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea that saying no right now means you can't say yes when you want to say yes, that's just bullshit. And it's not anybody's right to tell you who you have to be with. Just like shaming you for having an interest in women, shaming you for not having an interest in women is a flat out lie. There's no shame in that. Just like Reed Moonblade gives us 434 and says fiat currencies are a lie. See, so we have a plethora of lies being called out today. Let's see. We can, I don't know if we have any other, I don't think we do have any other ones.
No, there was the last color that we were going to cover, though.
Yeah, and I didn't know if Anna had anything to add to this. I didn't give her a chance to talk. I don't know, Anna, are you there?
She might have stepped away from the keyboard for a minute.
Or might be muted. In that case, going on, whoops, sorry, I had to pull the window out from behind. I have like 5 windows open in here, and I'm having to move them around in order to... There we go. So we have the charge of defeatism, which is all the way down here. Code Maroon. Not to be confused with Magenta or Columbia. The discussion on this one, this shaming tactic is akin to the charge of irascibility and the charge of cowardice, and that the accuser attacks the target's negative or guarded attitude about a situation. However, the focus is not so much the target's anger or fear, but the target's supposed attitude of resignation. The examples being, stop being so negative, you are so cynical. If you refuse to have relationships with women, then you are admitting defeat. Come on, men are doers, not quitters. This one I see, where I see this used the most. We talk a lot about the fact that there are few, if any, facilities out there that assist men who are abused by female partners in escaping their relationships. We talk about the fact that most of the time when a facility says that they serve both sexes, if you're a man and you call them for help to get out of a situation where you are being physically assaulted and physically endangered by your female partner, they're likely to offer you perpetrator counseling. They're likely to offer you anger management. They might accuse you of being the abuser and turn it around on you. But they're very unlikely to actually offer you a place to stay so that you can get out, and offer you the type of representative that a woman gets in the courtroom for a divorce in order to protect her financial interests and things like that. So we talk about this. We talk about this being why men don't report abuse. You know, it's not that they don't report abuse because they're stoic. It's not that they don't report abuse because they don't care that it's happening to them. It's not that they don't report abuse because they can take it. It's that they don't report abuse because when they do, these things happen. This is a common experience. And because of that, they don't see any route for reporting abuse to get them the help they need. And so we get told, oh, you're being cynical. Oh, you're so negative. I thought men were doers. Why don't you just fix your own problems? Why don't you start a shelter yourself? You know, you're already in this situation, right? You're already in a situation where you're the one being abused. Well, why don't you just start a shelter? Really? Where? With what? With what resources? How much does it cost every year to run a shelter? How much does it cost every week? What permits do you have to run a shelter? Give me all that information. You know, what do you have to, what resources do you need besides straight up cash? What neighborhood can you do this in? You know, what kind of response are you going to get from the local government? What kind of response are you going to get from the neighbors? Let's just go start a shelter without thinking of any of these things, because men are doers, not quitters. You know.
Yeah.
And I'm not against planning and executing a plan to do something like this. I'm simply against responding to complaints about the situation with, why haven't you changed it?
Yeah, like people who are in crisis, like you said, that they're not going to have the wherewithal to be able to do that sort of thing, or people who have experienced it in the past, they might not have the finances to do it either. Or look at Earl Silverman, who tried to do just that. He tried to open a shelter for men who needed help, and he wound up not being able to get funding for it, and then wound up taking his own life over the whole thing. And you know, like what do they expect us to do, right? Like there's only so much that you can do, and if you can't get like support for doing it, if you're just trying to like run it out of your own house, then there's kind of a limit on what you can do. So I don't want to say that it's impossible, that we shouldn't try and work to do it, but it's not easy. Like the fact that we have a shelter for men and families in Canada now is a great start. Maybe we'll be able to open more across Canada, but it's not easy. So just throwing out the why don't you go start your own shelter, it just speaks to a fundamental lack of understanding about how difficult it can be to do these things.
Exactly. You also have a situation where feminists have fought really hard to not only prevent funding from being like equally distributed, government funding from equally distributed, they actually have portrayed men's shelters as threats under various circumstances. If a man can go and accuse his ex-wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, of abuse, that undermines her ability to use accusations against him in divorce court. So they don't want, for instance, they don't want a woman to be confronted if she goes into a shelter with false allegations. They don't want a woman to be confronted with, on the other side of the aisle, her ex-husband, or her soon-to-be ex-husband, with his own advocate in the courtroom, equal to the advocate that the government currently provides for the woman making allegations of abuse, to advocate for his financial interests, because then she won't be able to turn around and use those allegations of abuse to get the house and half of his income and half of his assets and custody of the kids and a child support settlement on top of all those things and a restraining order to keep him from interfering with her custody. So we have this situation where, on top of dealing with the funding issues, we are also dealing with opposition in general. But that said, exposing feminism's response to this is the charge of defeatism can be diffused by explaining that one is merely being realistic about the situation. And that's kind of what we were talking about at the beginning. You have a set of things you have to consider in terms of taking on an initiative like starting a shelter. What happens if you start a shelter and you cannot maintain the funding, and you cannot maintain the building, and you cannot maintain the resources that the building needs, like food and utilities, and you have 20 men living in that shelter that rely on you for those resources, and all of a sudden it closes? What happens to them when it closes? What happens if you can't tell them ahead of time? More than maybe a couple of days or a week or a month. Well, we're going to be shutting down, and this place is going to have to be empty, and you're going to have to go live somewhere else. You have 30 days to get out. I know we haven't found you a job yet, but we're all screwed. What happens to them? Have you helped them in that situation, or did you make them homeless by asking them to depend on you and then failing them? That's one of the reasons why Earl Silverman committed suicide. Not to say that shelters are impossible. And if you want to support an existing men's shelter in Canada, for instance, look to CAFE. CAFE is an organization that supports, it's a Canadian Association for Equality, and it supports a number of initiatives. One of them is a men's shelter. So it takes an organization that is larger and has, it's at least in Canada, not a political standing, but an apolitical standing in order to be able to do something like that. The government the Canadian government wouldn't help us start a shelter because we are a men's rights organization. They wouldn't help us start a shelter for men because we're political. Get a load of that. Exposing feminism goes on to say, also, one can point out that asking men to just accept their mistreatment at the hands of women in society is the real attitude that is defeatist. Many men have not lost their resolve. Many have just lost their patience. And that's another end of it. Calling someone defeatist for recognizing what's happening is projection. It's defeatist to turn around and say, that's your lot in life and you have to accept it. Let's see. And I will go on with the rest. I think we have one more super chat, and then I think that is the show. Unless anybody has anything else to say on the topic of defeatism.
No, I think that's about it.
Alright, so we have Frenchinator2 gave us US $2 and said, circumcision is a violation of a natural right. And I will totally agree with that. At least in terms of involuntary circumcision, and particularly involuntary neonatal circumcision. This is one of my big issues, and it's not the first thing I got involved in the movement to deal with, but it's been something that's been an issue. I guess you could say in my repertoire of political issues I discussed for quite some time. Recognizing the fact that bodily autonomy applies to both sexes seems to be a major challenge for today's society. Like they don't recognize that it is an equal violation of bodily autonomy to engage in a sexual assault on a male victim. They don't recognize that it is an equal violation of bodily autonomy to engage in battery of a male victim. And they don't recognize that it is an equal violation of bodily autonomy to engage in involuntary or non-consensual genital cutting against a male victim. So basically, society doesn't recognize men's ownership of men's bodies as readily as it recognizes women's ownership of women's bodies. That needs to change. But with that, I think we're going to end the show.
We have one more super chat.
Oh, we have one more super chat. We have the showstopper of a super chat. Exploding Pretty gives us US $5 and says +1 super chat. So with that super chat, we can attack the monsters that you have to have the magic super chats to hit. That you can't just hit with ordinary super chats. And with that, I would like to thank my co-hosts for coming on the show with me. I'd like to thank everybody for listening. I'd like to thank all of the people involved in making the Honey Badger, HBR Talk show happen. And I would also like to thank everybody who's going to listen, like I said, via badgerfeed.com, listen to the show in its audio format later on. Thank you all and good night.